The ventral vagus has been evolved in higher primates and humans who are adapted to social connection and engagement. So the ventral vagus is I feel connected, I feel safe, I feel okay to interact and connect with other people, mainly my caregivers when I'm young. So the ventral vagus is very, very, very good. Okay, ventral vagus is what will help bring us out of these states of sympathetic nervous system arousal or freeze or immobilization, which is very, very important. And we get that. We stimulate early on in our life. Our ventral vagus is brought online through that nurturing, that connection, that eye connection, that touch with our parents or caregivers, mainly our mother. Okay, so if we run through the example of a baby crying, which can be a bit of a touchy subject for people, but more people are starting to get it now. So let's say that we leave a baby to cry it out, okay, which a whole multiple generations of parents were told to do. Yeah, no one's fault. This is just what we were told to do based on information up until that time. Then the way it works is, imagine I go and put my baby to sleep, leave, and all of a sudden my baby starts crying, and I've been told by whoever that that's my baby trying to manipulate me. I need to let them learn how to get to sleep by themselves. Then what happens? That's a sympathetic nervous system state that the baby is in. So it's in hyperarousal because the baby then wakes up, mum or dad isn't around. I literally need mum or dad for my survival. I don't know when they're going to come back, so I'll start screaming because fight or flight. I can't fight because I'm a baby, and I can't flight because I'm a baby. I'm in a cot or something, you know. I don't have those options. So I go to the option that I have, which is crying and yelling and screaming, trying to get the attention of the people that I love. Now, what will happen if we're taught to leave that baby crying? Then what will happen? Eventually, the baby will stop crying. And what we will think is, oh, great, the baby's learnt to soothe itself and it's okay now. Not the case. What's happened, as you can see with this diagram now, a baby's gone from sympathetic nervous system arousal over to dorsal vagus high tone, which is the freeze or immobilization response. So the baby has stopped crying, which is kind of what the parent wanted, but it has not gone into a rest or digest or a ventral vagus state. It's gone into this freeze or immobilization state, which is kind of like I've given up. My crying is not working. My calls for help aren't working. So I'm now going to go into this immobilization response. Okay.
So it's if we're to use the metaphor or the example I was talking about before with my cat and the mouse, you know, the cat scurries, that's the baby crying. And so these sympathetic states, that can look like terror, anger, you know, screaming, all of those. So there's really heightened states, anxiety, etc. They're really sympathetic, activated. It's like up energy, you know, whereas dorsal vagal is like down, shutting down energy. So, you know, like what happens in a baby's nervous system is, you know, and this is more infants, you know, this isn't so much toddlers, you know, because toddlers have developed a nervous system enough where they can self-soothe in different ways. And that's not to say we just completely let them cry it out or anything like that. But with infants, you know, especially what happens is they need parents nurturing like they need water. So there was a study done overseas where they would, it was when germ theory first came out, and they wouldn't touch these babies, and so they spread the babies apart, and the babies died because lack of nurturing. So it is like it's a need in our physiology, in our body, for our body survival, that we have this nurturing from a caregiver, whether it's our mother or, you know, adopted parents or, you know, a big brother or sister. We need something to attach to.
Yep.
And what happens is when we don't get that, say when we're crying, that need's there, so we're in a survival state. You know, the baby's calling for that need, like water, you know, and then the baby's nervous system will go into a state of terror, and then it'll go into a state of rage, you know, because rage is another sympathetic state about survival, you know, and so this little infant's going into a state of rage, and when the rage doesn't work, so that's the fight or flight, the terror and the rage, it will go into a freeze immobilization. We'll go to complete dorsal vagal shutdown, you know, into powerlessness. So like the mouse in the cat's mouth plays dead. And at that point, and, you know, like it's kind of hard talking about this because, you know, like runs the risk of people who have done this with like a lot of self-blame and all that sort of stuff, guilt and shame and all that sort of stuff. But like on another level, I weigh this up and I think, well, it's more important to talk about this than it is to not, you know, we're going to be running that risk of people, you know, falling into that dorsal vagal response by hearing this. You know, so like what happens then is we say, oh, good, they've cried it out, and but what's really happened is they've fallen into a state of like catatonic state of immobilization. This dorsal vagal response, as if they've nearly died, as if the infant's nearly died. And then what happens is when that's done over and over again, the nervous system then adapts to that. And anytime we go to have a need, express our needs later in life or anything like that, we'll fall into a dorsal vagal response. And we'll swing
Absolutely.
between these simple sympathetic nervous system and dorsal vagal.
Yeah, so we've trained our nervous system to be in one of those two states, and we sort of and we ping between the two. Now, where the healthy version of this lies is when, let's say, the baby, and this can be anything. This can not just be a baby going to sleep. This can be an unsafe household where the father's drinking and angry all the time. This can be physical abuse, any type of trauma. But I'm just using this baby as an example here because it's a good one. So what happens? Let's say the baby does start to cry and it goes into that sympathetic nervous system response, and then the mother comes into the room, picks that baby up, looks it in the eyes, has that connection with it. Then what happens, instead of the baby dipping into freeze or immobilization, that social engagement will start to activate the ventral vagus. Okay, so what happens then, the infant's system can actually relax. Okay. Now, what we're doing now, we're just training it in a different way. So what happens as this infant starts to become a toddler and grow up, because we think, here's where we get caught up. We feel like our kids are going to be too dependent all the time. If I keep picking them up all the time, they're going to be overly dependent on me. But what happens, it's actually the opposite that happens. The more dependent than the infant is and the baby is early on, the more safe they feel to be independent as they start to grow up.
Exactly.
Because if I now have trained, instead of going sympathetic to freeze and mobilization, sympathetic to connection and engage, the ventral vagus, then I adapt and train that part. So now I feel safer. Safer to come from a nervous system to a more relaxed state, which means as I grow into a toddler and older, I'm more free to venture off and explore the world, because the world's going to stimulate that sympathetic nervous system, because the world's pretty scary when you're little. But if I know that I can come back to that ventral vagus and that social engagement because I've been dependent for those first couple of years of my life, then I'm going to be able to better explore the world as opposed to being stuck in that freeze or immobilization response.
That's exactly right. And I say that all the time when you speak. That's exactly right. You say 100%.
I say 100%. Yes.
Yeah. And so like I can't remember who it was. It was either Peter Levine or Bessel van der Kolk. One of those people said, when you feel safe, you will start to explore the world and stuff like that. So we start to gain our own independence. It's a real natural thing, just to leave the nest. The bird doesn't, like the baby bird doesn't become over dependent on the mother to get its worms. It's like a natural progression outside of the nest when the right environment is set. We can set the right environment to have a healthy nervous system for our children, and then they will grow up, and nature will take care of it. Life will take its course. They will become independent. So we have had it backwards in a sense.